The fee notice arrived at 7:14 on a Thursday morning. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Our HOA dues had always been $900 a year. Annoying, but predictable. The kind of number you grumble about in January, pay before the late fee, and forget until the pool key stops working even though we did not have a pool. This notice said $2,700. 3 times the old amount. The subject line was cheerful. Community fence renewal plan. The first sentence said the increase was necessary to protect property values. The second sentence said the board had worked hard to keep costs reasonable. The third sentence said payment was due in 30 days. By the fourth sentence, I had stopped drinking my coffee. My name is Lena Parker. I was 36 years old, and I had lived in Bridal Creek for 6 years. I was not on the HOA board. I was not one of those neighbors who measured grass with a ruler or reported trash cans at 6:01 p.m. I paid my dues, kept my yard clean, and ignored most of the drama. But I work in project finance. My job is reading the part of a budget that people hope nobody reads. So when a volunteer board tells 45 homeowners that a routine maintenance project suddenly requires a 300% fee increase, my first reaction is not outrage. It is curiosity. And curiosity is expensive for people who hide numbers badly. Bridal Creek was small. 4 cul-de-sacs, 45 large homes, 1 front sign, and a narrow strip of common landscaping by the entrance. That was it. No clubhouse. No tennis court. No guarded gate. No walking trail owned by the association. Most of our fees went to mowing the entrance, insurance, management, and reserves for a strange category in the documents called rear perimeter fencing. That part mattered. When the neighborhood was built 25 years earlier, the developer had put cedar fencing behind some of the lots. Not every lot. Just the lots whose backyards touched the outer edges of the subdivision. The side fences between neighbors were private. The front fences were not allowed. The rear perimeter fences were listed as an HOA maintenance item because they formed the outer boundary of the community. I knew that because I had read the documents before buying my house. Most people had not. The notice said the rear fencing had reached the end of its life, which was probably true. Cedar does not live forever, especially when half the owners water it like a houseplant and the other half ignore it until it leans like a tired waiter. The notice also said the board had selected vinyl replacement fencing for long-term durability. That was the first strange part. Our governing documents did not require vinyl. They required material and color compatibility with existing structures. Vinyl might have been allowed, but changing from cedar to vinyl across only some sections would make the back of the neighborhood look like someone patched a suit jacket with shower curtain. The second strange part was the amount. $2,700 per home, across 45 homes, meant $121,500. For fencing. In a neighborhood where not every home even had HOA-owned rear fencing. I opened the attachment. It was a 3-page PDF from the management company. Page 1 was the fee notice. Page 2 was a summary budget. Page 3 was a letter from our board president, Grant Ellison, explaining that responsible boards make hard choices. Grant loved phrases like that. Hard choices. Shared sacrifice. Protecting our investment. He used them the way other people use air freshener. Grant lived on Ashford Court, at the far northwest edge of the neighborhood. His back fence touched the largest stretch of HOA-maintained cedar in the subdivision. 2 other board members, Denise Ward and Paul Mercer, lived on the same outer edge. I did not think about that immediately. I just saved the PDF. Then I printed it, because sometimes a bad document becomes more honest when it is on paper. The summary budget showed 3 lines. Fence replacement reserve recovery, $84,000. Material upgrade adjustment, $26,000. Project administration and contingency, $11,500. No vendor name. No bid comparison. No map. No phase schedule. No explanation of why every homeowner owed the same amount when the fencing did not touch every homeowner's lot. I forwarded the PDF to my personal email and made a folder called Bridal Creek Fence. That was not revenge. That was habit. The HOA announced a Zoom annual meeting for the following Tuesday. The email said the board would present the plan, answer questions, and hold a vote to approve the special assessment. I wrote back with one sentence. Could you please send the full project packet, including vendor bids, the fencing responsibility map, the reserve study, and the proposed phase schedule, before the meeting? The management company replied the next morning. Lena, all relevant documents will be reviewed during the meeting. That answer told me two things. First, they had more documents. Second, they did not want us reading them before anyone could ask questions. I replied again. For voting purposes, I would prefer to review the documents in advance. Please also include any board conflict disclosures or recusal notes related to affected properties. No response. But 3 hours later, Grant posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. Folks, please do not let misinformation derail necessary maintenance. If you do not understand HOA budgeting, the annual meeting is the right place to listen and learn. I smiled at that. Not because it was funny. Because he had just made his first mistake in writing. He did not say the documents existed. He did not say they would be provided. He did not answer the question about affected properties. He said I did not understand budgeting. That was fine. People often mistake a calm question for confusion. On Saturday morning, the management portal updated with the annual meeting packet. It was not emailed. Nobody announced it. I found it because I logged in and checked every tab. The file name was agm_final_packet_v3. Version 3. That meant there had been at least 2 earlier versions. I downloaded it. The packet was 27 pages long. Most of it was normal HOA filler. Meeting agenda. Prior minutes. Treasurer's report. A short note about mulch near the entrance sign. Then, near the back, there was a section called Fence Renewal Project. That was where the math started to smell. The project packet showed a simple map of the neighborhood. It marked rear perimeter fencing in red. It also marked Phase 1, Phase 2, and future phase. Phase 1 was scheduled for immediate replacement. Phase 2 was scheduled for the following year. Future phase had no date. I put the map next to a county parcel map on my second monitor. Then I opened a spreadsheet and started matching addresses. Ashford Court appeared first. Grant Ellison's lot. Denise Ward's lot. Paul Mercer's lot. 3 board members. All in Phase 1. Then 2 more homes on the same outer edge, both owned by people who had served on board committees. My house was not in Phase 1. I did not have HOA rear fencing. I had 2 private side fences and a line of trees behind my lot. 22 homes had no HOA fence touching their property at all. Every one of us was being charged $2,700 immediately. The packet also included a vendor proposal. Not 3 bids. 1 proposal. 1. It was from Northline Outdoor Solutions, and it did not include a detailed scope by lot. It included total linear feet, material type, disposal, installation, and a line for project coordination. Project coordination was $8,000. I highlighted that too. Then I looked at the board minutes from the previous 2 meetings. The April minutes said, fence issue discussed. Grant to obtain numbers. The May minutes said, board reviewed fence options. Motion to proceed with preferred vendor pending annual meeting. No vote count. No note that 3 board members owned Phase 1 lots. No recusal. No conflict disclosure. No record of any alternate bid. At that point, I did not need to prove anyone had stolen anything. That is not how paper works. Paper does not need to scream. It just needs to make the next question unavoidable. I sent a formal records request to the management company on Monday morning. I kept it polite. I listed exactly what I wanted. All vendor bids or proposals obtained for the fence project. All communications between board members and vendors regarding the project. The reserve study or reserve analysis used to support the assessment. The map showing which fence segments are HOA responsibility. Any policy explaining equal assessment for homes not adjacent to HOA maintained fencing. Meeting minutes showing board approval of the vendor and phase schedule. Any conflict disclosures or recusal records for board members whose properties are included in Phase 1. I copied the board email address. Then I did something Grant did not expect. I copied 11 neighbors who had already complained privately about the fee but had not wanted to speak in public. I did not accuse anyone. I wrote, since this assessment applies to all owners, I am requesting the supporting records before the vote. That was all. By lunch, my phone was buzzing. One neighbor, Helen, wrote, "Wait, my house has no rear fence. Why am I paying the same?" Another wrote, "Are you saying Grant's fence is first?" I replied to both the same way. I am saying the meeting packet lists Phase 1 addresses. You should compare them with the parcel map. I did not say Grant was corrupt. I did not have to. Grant called me at 3:42 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. He texted 2 minutes later. "Lena, this is getting out of hand. Please call me before you confuse people." I replied, "Please keep communication in writing until after the records request is fulfilled." He did not like that. He wrote, "There is no need to turn this into an investigation. The board is doing what is best for the community." I saved the text. Then I replied, "If the documents support that, they should calm everyone down." He did not answer. The management company responded at 5:18 p.m. They said some records would be available after the annual meeting because the board had not yet formally approved the project. That sentence was beautiful. Not morally beautiful. Procedurally beautiful. If the board had not formally approved the project, why had they sent a payment notice with a due date? If the project was not approved, why did the packet already list a preferred vendor and a phase schedule? If the records could not be produced before the vote, how were owners supposed to vote in an informed way? I wrote those 3 questions in a new email. Then I added, "Please confirm whether the payment notice is withdrawn pending a properly noticed vote." I copied the same 11 neighbors. By 8 p.m. I was no longer the only problem. The Facebook group had split into 3 camps. Camp 1 was angry about the cost. Camp 2 was angry that anyone was questioning volunteers. Camp 3 had finally opened the packet. Camp 3 was the dangerous one. That night, I built a cleaner version of the map. I did not use dramatic colors. I did not label anyone a thief. I made it boring on purpose. Boring documents make angry people look silly when they try to dismiss them. Column 1 was the lot number. Column 2 was the street address. Column 3 said whether the lot touched HOA maintained rear fencing. Column 4 said whether the lot was in Phase 1. Column 5 said whether the owner served on the board or a board committee. Then I added a final column called immediate benefit. For my house, it said no. For 21 other houses, it said no. For Grant's house, it said yes. For Denise's house, it said yes. For Paul's house, it said yes. I stared at that table for a long time, because the table did what the board letter refused to do. It separated community responsibility from private benefit. Those are not always enemies. Sometimes a community really does have to maintain something that only touches a few homes. Drainage easements work that way. Retaining walls work that way. Shared roofs work that way in condos. But when the people deciding the timing are also the first people receiving the work, you do not get to skip the extra paperwork. You need bids. You need minutes. You need a reason for the order of repairs. You need a record showing that the people who benefit did not steer the money. The board had none of that. The next morning, Helen sent me a photo of her back fence. It was private. Her husband had paid to replace it 2 years earlier. She wrote, "If they can make me pay for Grant's back fence, can I send them my invoice too?" I told her not to post that yet. Not because it was wrong. Because sarcasm lets people dodge the real issue. The real issue was cleaner. The board had sent a bill before producing the documents that justified the bill. That was the whole blade. I also checked our declaration again. The section on common expenses said the association could assess owners equally for common area maintenance. It did not say the board could reclassify a major improvement as an emergency without a documented basis. It did not say board members could vote on a phase that directly improved their own lots without disclosure. There was a procurement policy too. It was buried in a board resolution from 8 years earlier, scanned sideways into the portal under miscellaneous governance. Anything over $20,000 required at least 2 written bids unless the board recorded the reason for an exception. I almost laughed when I found that. Not because it was funny. Because Grant had spent 3 days implying I did not understand HOA budgeting, and his own HOA had a purchasing rule sitting in the file cabinet like a loaded spring. I downloaded it. I printed it. I added it to the folder. Then I sent one more email to the management company. Please also include the written reason for waiving the 2-bid requirement under the association's procurement resolution. Allison did not answer that one. But 15 minutes later, Grant posted again. Everyone, please bring your questions to the meeting. The board will not continue responding to selective interpretations of documents. Selective interpretations. That was another phrase people use when they are upset that the selection came from their own documents. A retired engineer named Sam posted a screenshot of the Phase 1 map and wrote, "Why are the first replacements all along Ashford Court?" Grant replied within 6 minutes. Because that section is in the worst condition. Sam asked, "Where's the condition report?" Grant did not answer. Denise posted, "This is exactly why good people stop volunteering. People attack without understanding the work." I stayed out of it. That was hard. But there is a point in a paper trail where the smartest thing you can do is stop adding noise. The meeting happened Tuesday night. I logged in 10 minutes early. The Zoom waiting room opened to 41 participants, which was the highest attendance I had ever seen for anything in Bridal Creek, including the year someone found a snake in the mailbox cluster and treated it like a war crime. Grant was in a collared shirt, sitting in front of a bookshelf. Denise had a blurred background. Paul looked annoyed before anyone spoke. The property manager, Allison, was also on the call. She looked like she already regretted her career. Grant started with the usual script. Thank you all for joining. We know the assessment has created some questions, but the board has spent months reviewing options, and this project is necessary to protect property values. I took notes. He shared a slide deck. The first slide showed a nice stock photo of white vinyl fencing. Not our neighborhood. Not our fence. A stock photo. That annoyed people more than I expected. A few microphones clicked on and off. Grant continued. He explained that the cedar was failing. He explained that costs had risen. He explained that delaying repairs would cost more later. None of that was impossible. Then he said, "The board recommends approving the assessment tonight so we can lock in pricing." That was when I raised my hand. Grant ignored it. Sam raised his hand. Helen raised hers. 4 more hands went up. Grant said, "Let's hold questions until the end." I wrote that down too. Allison, the property manager, stepped in. "Grant, since this is a voting matter, we may want to answer procedural questions before the motion." Grant's jaw moved. "Fine. Lena, you had a question?" I unmuted. I said, "Yes. Before any vote, can the board confirm whether the payment notice sent last Thursday is withdrawn until after approval?" Grant blinked. The notice was to prepare homeowners. I said, "It included a due date." Allison looked down. Grant said, "The due date assumes approval." I said, "Where does it say that?" He looked at the paper in front of him, then at the screen. "It is implied." Sam muttered, "Not on my invoice." Grant said, "Please, one at a time." I continued, "My second question is about the Phase 1 map. Can the board confirm which board members own properties adjacent to Phase 1 fencing?" Denise unmuted so fast that her audio clipped. "That is inappropriate." I said, "It is a conflict question. I am not asking for private information. The addresses are in the packet, and board ownership is already known to the association." Paul said, "Every homeowner benefits from perimeter maintenance." I said, "That was not my question." The chat started moving. Helen wrote, "Answer it." Someone else wrote, "My house is not on perimeter fencing." Grant said, "The board members who live near Phase 1 did not choose that section for personal benefit." I said, "Then there should be a condition report showing why Phase 1 was selected." Silence. Not long. Maybe 3 seconds. But in a Zoom meeting full of angry homeowners, 3 seconds becomes a room. Grant said, the condition was obvious. I said, obvious to whom? Allison cleared her throat. Grant, do we have a written condition assessment from the vendor? Grant said, the vendor walked the property. I said, is there a written report? He said, I do not have it in front of me. I wrote that down. Then I asked the question that made the meeting turn. Did any board member whose property is included in Phase 1 vote on the vendor, the material change, the phase schedule, or the assessment amount? Denise said, we are volunteers. We are allowed to vote. I said, I am asking whether anyone recused. Paul said, this is not a court. I said, no. It is a corporate meeting with minutes. That landed. Because that was exactly what an HOA was. Not a friendly club. Not a neighborhood mood board. A corporation with authority to collect money from owners. And corporations have records. Allison leaned closer to her camera. I think it would be best if the board tabled the vote until we can provide the records requested. Grant said, that is not necessary. Allison said, from a management standpoint, I recommend it. She used the voice people use when they want their recommendation quoted later. Grant heard it too. He said, we cannot delay essential maintenance every time someone asks for paperwork. I said, you are asking us for $121,500. Paperwork is the minimum. The chat exploded. One neighbor wrote, exactly. Another wrote, I want all bids. Another wrote, why vinyl? Then Sam asked, do we even have 3 bids? Grant said, Northline was the most responsive vendor. That was not an answer. I asked, how many vendors submitted written proposals? Grant said, we contacted several. I said, how many submitted written proposals? He looked off screen. 1. There it was. 1 proposal. 1 preferred vendor. 1 phase schedule. 3 board members in the first phase. 45 owners being charged equally. No condition report in the packet. No recusal record. No bid comparison. No written explanation for vinyl. No vote yet, despite a payment notice already sent. It was not one smoking gun. It was a table full of receipts, and every receipt pointed in the same direction. Then I brought up the procurement resolution. I said, the association's purchasing policy requires at least 2 written bids for work over $20,000 unless the board records the reason for an exception. Where is that exception recorded? Grant's expression went empty in the specific way people look when they are trying to remember whether a document exists. Denise said, that policy is old. I said, has it been repealed? She said, I do not know. I said, then it is still a policy until someone shows us otherwise. Sam unmuted. I have it open. It is signed by a prior board and still posted under governance. Paul said, this is exactly the kind of nitpicking that makes it impossible to get anything done. I said, requiring a second bid on a 6-figure project is not nitpicking. A woman named Priya, who almost never spoke in meetings, unmuted and said, I run vendor contracts for a dental group. If I brought 1 bid for $100,000 and no exception note, my CFO would send me back to my desk. That was when the meeting stopped being me against the board. That was another turning point. A board can dismiss one homeowner as difficult. It can dismiss 2 as emotional. It has a harder time dismissing a retired engineer, a finance manager, a contracts professional, and 20 people in the chat asking for the same missing documents. Grant tried one more time. He said, the longer we delay, the more costs will rise. I said, then the first written bid will help us compare the second and third ones. Helen said, and the condition report. Sam said, and the phase criteria. Priya said, and the recusal record. It was almost quiet after that, because everyone could see the shape of the problem. The board had wanted 1 vote on 1 number. Now there were 4 document requests attached to it, and each one was reasonable. That is the part people miss about rules. You do not need an accusation when the process itself has a missing step. You just point to the step. Grant tried to recover by saying the project could be discussed further after the vote, but that made people louder. You do not approve a bill first and ask for the invoice later. Not for groceries. Not for construction. Not for an HOA run by people who live behind the first fence being replaced. Allison interrupted again. I am advising the board to postpone the vote. This time she said advising. Not suggesting. Advising. Grant's face changed. He finally understood that the management company was no longer protecting his timeline. They were protecting themselves from being included in the next records request. The vote did not happen. The official reason was that the board wanted to provide additional information to homeowners. That was the phrase in the minutes. Additional information. It sounded gentle. What it meant was that the board had tried to collect over $100,000 on a project they could not document in front of the people paying for it. 2 days later, the management company sent a notice withdrawing the payment deadline. Not canceling the project. Withdrawing the deadline. That difference mattered. They were still trying to keep the idea alive, but the invoice had lost its teeth. The records arrived the following week in a shared folder. There was one written vendor proposal. There were 2 emails to other vendors asking for rough estimates, both sent only after my records request. There was no reserve study supporting the full amount. There was no written condition report. There was no conflict disclosure form. There was no recusal note. There was also one email from Grant to Northline that made several homeowners go quiet. It said, "We want to start with the Ashford Court stretch because that is the most visible section to board members and it will help build support for the broader project." Most visible to board members. Not most damaged. Not most urgent. Most visible to board members. I printed that email and put it on top of the stack. There was another email that mattered almost as much. It was from Denise to Grant and Paul, sent before the first notice went out. She wrote, "If we do the whole outer fence at once, owners without rear fence will complain. Better to present it as one community standard project and not get into lot-by-lot benefit." I read that sentence 3 times. Not get into lot-by-lot benefit. That was exactly the thing owners needed to understand before paying. The board had discussed the problem. They knew some owners would question why they were paying the same amount for work that did not touch their lots. Their solution was not to explain the rule. It was to avoid the detail. I added that email under the first one. Most visible to board members. Not get into lot-by-lot benefit. Those 2 lines did more damage than any speech I could have written. They showed intent. Not criminal intent. Not some dramatic backroom plot. Something more ordinary and, in a way, more believable. They showed a board that knew the facts would make the sale harder, so they tried to sell the assessment before the facts arrived. That is how a lot of bad decisions happen. Not with secret envelopes. With convenience. With people saying, if we explain too much, everyone will argue. With people deciding the process is a hurdle instead of the job. I sent one final email before the next meeting. I attached the procurement resolution. I attached the 2 board emails. I attached the Phase 1 map. I attached the address comparison table. I did not write a paragraph about corruption. I wrote 5 questions. 1. Will the board withdraw the current assessment notice? 2. Will the board obtain the bids required by the purchasing policy? 3. Will the board produce a written condition assessment for every HOA-owned fence segment? 4. Will board members whose lots are included in any phase recuse from votes on that phase? 5. Will the association separate urgent repairs from discretionary material upgrades? I sent it to the management company, the board, and every owner who had asked to be copied. Grant did not reply. Allison did. She wrote, "These questions will be addressed at the next open meeting." That was the first clean answer we had received. The next meeting was not nearly as cheerful. This time, the board did not open with a stock photo. They opened with Allison explaining the revised process. 3 bids would be obtained. A fence condition assessment would be prepared. Board members whose properties were included in a proposed phase would abstain from voting on that phase. The material change from cedar to vinyl would require owner comment before approval. The assessment would not be reissued until after the documents were complete. Grant did not speak much. Denise said she felt the board's integrity had been unfairly questioned. A man from the next cul-de-sac asked, "Then why did the first invoice come before the documents?" Denise did not answer. Paul announced a month later that he would not run for another term. Denise resigned before the next annual meeting, saying the environment had become hostile to volunteers. Grant stayed until the end of his term, but he stopped posting speeches about responsible leadership. The final fence project did happen eventually. That is important. The old cedar really was failing. Some sections needed replacement. Nobody serious denied that. But the final plan looked nothing like the first one. The assessment was split into phases. Only documented HOA-owned fence segments were included. The material stayed cedar where cedar compatibility was required. 3 vendors bid. The second vendor came in almost $18,000 lower than Northline for the same cedar replacement work. The third vendor was higher, but included a written condition assessment with photos, segment numbers, and urgency ratings. That was the vendor the owners trusted most, because he had done something the board had avoided from the beginning. He showed his work. The assessment sorted the fence into 3 categories: immediate safety repair, replacement within 12 months, monitor and maintain. Only 2 short runs were listed as immediate safety repair. Neither one was behind Grant's house. That detail moved through the neighborhood faster than the original fee notice. For weeks, the board had acted as if Ashford Court was the obvious emergency. The written assessment said otherwise. Grant tried to argue that the vendor might have different standards, but by then nobody wanted standards that lived only in Grant's head. The new plan started with the 2 immediate repair sections. Then it set a reserve contribution for the next 2 years. Then it required a separate owner vote for any material change from cedar to vinyl. It was slower. It was less shiny. It was documented. That was enough. Affected board members abstained from phase votes. The first year cost per homeowner was not $2,700. It was $680. Grant never apologized. He did not have to. The numbers did it for him. The funny thing about board power is that it feels huge until someone asks where it is written. Then it becomes a folder. A motion. A minute entry. A line item. A signature. An address on a phase map. Grant thought the vote would be about whether we cared about the neighborhood. It was not. It was about whether 45 homeowners should pay immediately for a project whose first benefits just happened to sit behind the houses of the people asking for the money. He wrote the fee notice. I only read the addresses. That was one HOA where the budget gave the board away. The next woman lived in a smaller community, with fewer houses, fewer assets, and one insurance bill that made even less sense. Mara Collins lived in a rural subdivision with 20 homes, no gate, no clubhouse, no pool, no private roads, and no common building. The HOA owned a wooden sign at the entrance, 2 patches of grass beside it, and a checking account that behaved like it was guarding state secrets. Mara was 41, a payroll manager, and the kind of person who noticed when a number repeated in a place it did not belong. Her annual dues were not huge. That was how the board avoided attention. A few $100s here. A small increase there. A reminder that the HOA was just preserving the neighborhood. Then the insurance line almost doubled. At first, people shrugged. Insurance was expensive everywhere. That was the answer to everything. Roof insurance. Car insurance. Health insurance. HOA insurance. But Mara looked at the budget and asked a simple question. What exactly are we insuring? The HOA did not own roads. The county maintained them. It did not own a park. It did not own a drainage pond. It did not own a building. It did not employ staff. It did not run events. It did not maintain a playground, because there was no playground. So why did a 20-home association with almost no assets need a policy that cost more every year? She asked the management company for the current policy. They sent a 1-page certificate of insurance. Not the policy. The certificate listed the carrier, the coverage dates, and the agent. The agent's firm name looked familiar. Mara searched it. One of the HOA board members, a man named Victor Hale, was listed as a partner at that agency. Not an employee in another branch. A partner. Mara did not post that in the neighborhood group. She did not call him a thief. She did not accuse the board of fraud. She sent a records request. Please provide the full current insurance policy, all prior policies for the last 5 years, all broker of record letters, all quotes obtained, all commission disclosures, and any meeting minutes where the board discussed or approved the current insurance provider. Please also provide any conflict disclosure or recusal record for board members associated with the insurance agency. The management company replied 3 days later. Mara, we have already provided proof of insurance. She wrote back, I did not request proof of insurance. I requested the policy records and approval documents. Then she quoted the section of the state nonprofit corporation law that gave members access to association records. That changed the tone. The next reply said the board would review her request. Mara forwarded both emails to 5 neighbors who had asked about dissolving the HOA years earlier and had been told it was too complicated. She wrote, if we own almost nothing, the records should be simple. That sentence spread faster than any accusation would have. If we own almost nothing, the records should be simple. At the next meeting, Victor said he had never personally profited from the HOA. Mara asked if his agency had. He said that was different. It was not different enough for the room. The full policy arrived 2 weeks later, along with a bundle of older documents that looked like they had been scanned in a hurry. There were no competing quotes for 3 of the 5 years. There were no recusal notes. There was one meeting minute that said, Victor will handle renewal. Victor will handle renewal. 4 words. That was the whole process. Mara made a table. Year, premium, carrier, agency, competing quotes, approval record, recusal. Most of the cells were blank. Blank cells are not dramatic, but they are very hard to argue with when the whole point is that records should exist. The board tried to say Mara was attacking volunteers. She replied that she was reviewing expenses. The board tried to say insurance was necessary. She replied that she was not disputing insurance, only the undisclosed process. The board tried to say dissolving the HOA would be risky. She replied with a list of assets the HOA owned. Entrance sign. 2 grass strips. Checking account. That was it. Within 3 months, enough homeowners had signed a petition to force a special meeting on whether the association should continue in its current form. The HOA did not dissolve overnight. Things like that rarely do. But the insurance renewal moved to a competitive bid, Victor stopped handling it, and the board had to adopt a conflict policy. The new premium was lower. Not by a life-changing amount. But by enough. Enough to prove the question had been worth asking. Mara told me later that people kept expecting her to say she hated HOAs. She did not. She hated invoices that arrived without records. There is a difference. An HOA can write rules. It can collect dues. It can maintain real property when the documents actually say it owns real property. But the moment the board asks ordinary homeowners to pay, the board also creates the one thing it cannot bully its way around. A record. Victor thought insurance was boring enough to hide in. He was almost right. Then Mara asked for the file.